2023 was a year of incredible build crafting in Destiny 2, so let's take a look at every single build we made throughout the year and see how they stack up against each other today. I also want to give a huge thank you to all y'all who watch these videos, because those who keep up with my socials know that this was by far the best year of my life. And to be honest, it was all made possible by your support. To say thanks, I'm doing a huge stream on December 30th to give back with a ton of giveaways for you, with things like exclusive rare emblem codes, Nintendo Switches, PCs, and much more. So be sure to stop by to celebrate this amazing year. Starting off strong with the very first build we dropped in Lightfall with all of the armor mod system changes, the Omnioculus Void Hunter 3.0 edition. To put it simply, this build was just a better version of the one displayed in the Omnioculus playbook videos that jump-started my channel, largely due to the fact that Armor 3.0 mods were overall better for this build compared to the 2.0 set, and due to the Echo of Starvation buffs that happened around this time that allowed Void Breach and Orb of Power pickup to grant Devour. The result was a new version of this build that could not only be permanently invisible 24/7, but that could also full heal on every kill and refund grenade energy on every kill. Despite some improvements being made down the line that you'll see later in this tier list, this build still clocks in at the S tier for living up to a tall promise that it will make you invincible. Moving over to the Space Wizards, we then cooked up a Strand Necrotic Grips Warlock build, something brand new that the game had never seen. The core setup of this build was that you could use the new Mindspun Invocation aspect to eat a Shackle Grenade to receive the Weaver's Trance buff, which allowed Final Blows to create a suspending detonation. Pair this buff with a poison weapon like Osteostriga and a poison spreading exotic like Necrotic Grips, and you could carry that suspending explosion through every enemy in an arena through a sort of domino effect that could effectively render everything useless. Now, since this build's inception, it has taken a hit due to the overall Strand Suspend nerfs, however has also received some buffs in some fashion, with other poison weapons like Thorn being new options for this setup. All in all, this bad boy clocks in comfortably in the A tier. Sticking with Strand, we then headed over to the 6th Coyote Strand Suspending Hunter, a build focused on utilizing 4 different ability cooldowns to suspend every enemy in sight, by rocking Shackle Grenades along with Widow's Silk for 2 grenade charges, and Ensnaring Slam for suspending dives paired with 6 Coyote for 2 class ability dive charges. You had the ability to wrap up pretty much any room of non-boss enemies, champions included. Similar to the previous Warlock setup though, this build also has gotten hit from the overall Strand Suspend nerfs, but found itself receiving a pretty small but impactful buff along the way through a bug fix that now allows the Reaper mod to activate when using the Ensnaring Slam dive, something that was not possible before. As a result, this one hangs out next to its Warlock counterpart in the A tier. Moving back to the good old days of nostalgia, we find ourselves looking at a build that was a serious contender for the best build of all time with the Starfire Protocol Solar Warlock setup. It could nuke bosses, champions, adds, and pretty much had no downsides considering that it had a well of radiance and constant super uptime with mods like Ashes to Assets along with it. However, time goes on and things change, and although it's not horrible these days, there are simply a lot of significantly better options that have the Starfire Protocol Warlock better left as a fond memory, landing it firmly in the B tier for today's day and age. Now, to prove that I am not classist against Titans, we made sure to showcase one of the strongest Titan setups in the game's history, the infinitely suspending Strand Avian Leap Titan setup. Not only was this build incredibly strong, but it was also extremely easy to use, with Avian Leap and Dranger's Lash suspending literally anything in a 90-degree cone in front of you, and Avian Leap giving you Woven Mail anytime you suspended anything. In addition to that, the Thread of Mind refunding your class ability energy anytime you killed a suspended target just made it so that you could spam this loop over and over again. The only downside to this is obviously the suspended nerfs that we've had since we made this one, but its ease of use and widespread crowd control potential still landed in the A tier. Now, I do need to warn you before we go over this one, if you are a Solar Hunter main, this one's going to hurt a little bit. Do me a favor and hit the like button down below to pour one out for young Ahamkara's spine, the latest victim of Bungie's PvP nerf collateral damage. This was by far one of the most enjoyable, explosive, and satisfying builds to use, and would have easily ended up on the S tier had it not rampaged trials for 4 weeks and gotten on Bungie's naughty list. The pure euphoria of landing the perfect combo that would result in like 10 trip mine grenade throws over 10 seconds was one of the most satisfying experiences the game had to offer. Sadly, it's just another one of those things that is just meant for patrols and public events these days, giving up the crown so that other star players can have their time in the sun, whilst this King of Kings resides down in the B tier. What has avoided the fate of young Ahamkara's spine, however, is the Arc Assassin's Cal Hunter that has remained at the throne for a long time. There's no two ways about this. When you have a build that can one-shot every enemy in the game, obtain a super in 20 seconds, spam pulse grenades, go invisible on every kill, fully heal on every kill, look insanely cool, and clock in as the most viewed video on one's YouTube channel by a margin of almost 200,000 views, it goes in the S tier. Getting a little colder, we have the Stasis Frosty's Hunter setup up next, a build that focused entirely on maximum Duskfield grenade uptime through extra exotic ability regeneration and grenade fragment regen boosts to cover the battlefield in snow globes and freeze everything in existence. The issue with this build, however, is that the exotic slotted in for this one wasn't necessarily picked because it suited the build perfectly, but rather because it was the best amongst a set of bad or nerfed options. In a meta where some new exotics have been introduced to the game and others have been restored to their former glory, it just doesn't make much sense to use this setup over others anymore, landing it unfortunately in the C tier. But we won't be down there for long, because the Solar Sunbracers Warlock setup that aimed to replace the nerfed Starfire Protocol build proved that Solar Warlocks were still very much alive and kicking just as hard as before. I mean, sure, it's not going to obliterate bosses in the same way that Starfire did, but when you have a setup that can produce more solar grenades than a game studio produces expansion delays, all while maintaining a restoration ×2 healing and radiant weapon damage buff, you'll be in good shape no matter what situation you find yourself in. Solar Sunbracers Warlock, comfortably in the S tier. Next up, we have the Ashen Wake Solar Titan, which is a setup that fell victim to the reality that Titans usually have like 2 or 3 super OP builds and about 100 used to be OP setups that got nerfed after a few seasons. This concoction was an attempt to break that mold, but the reality is that a build that basically gets shut down when your grenade doesn't one-hit kill the target you throw it at doesn't really have much of a place in most areas of Destiny outside of on-level content with lots of squishy red bars. As much as it pains me to say it, C tier for Ashen Wake. Moving over to the other side of the coin, Lucky Pants was one of those build videos where I looked at myself in the mirror one morning and said, Mac, are you really going to make a build video on Lucky Pants? And the result was a 500,000 view video that featured one of the most satisfying gunslinger builds in existence. There are few better feelings than one-magging a champion and a Grandmaster Nightfall with a primary weapon. But given that one of those better feelings is the 2.0 version of this build, attempt number 1 at the Lucky Pants setup finds itself comfortably in the A tier. Moving down a little bit, Warlock Void builds always seem all about grenades, and Controverse Hold is usually the go-to for folks looking to embark on their first Warlock build journey. It's simple, it's easy, and it's effective in most pieces of content. Problem is that if you are in a harder activity with tankier enemies where you aren't getting final blows frequently enough to proc some grenade refund through Devour, the grenade uptime doesn't feel quite as good as it needs to for this build to feel like it's firing on all cylinders. B tier for the Controverse Holds. And speaking of grenade builds, I always wanted to try and make one for hunters with something like the Shinobu's Vow for skip grenades on the Arc Hunter subclass. But as fun as it is to throw skip after skip after skip with double charges and enhanced tracking, The base damage of these grenades just isn't high enough to make it a serious contender in any challenging piece of content, landing the Shinobu's Vow Skip Grenade Arc Hunter in the C tier. Down there alongside it is the Caliban's Hand Solar Hunter, a build that I always wanted to love, but just could never truly understand the appeal of. And believe me, it wasn't for a lack of trying. The problem is that in a game where the proximity explosive knife just doesn't do that much damage, alongside being accompanied by an exotic that has 3 to 4 better alternative options these days, Caliban's just gets outclassed no matter how you dice it. Ophidius Faith works better in lower end content, Shards of Galanor just wipe the floor with it across the board, relegating the Caliban's Hand Solar Hunter to the C tier. Thankfully though, we can look to the Gerfalcon's Halberg Void Hunter build to put a little more pep into our step. Some Bungie employee basically looked at the stylish executioner aspect and said, what exotic can I make that will make this aspect fall in love? It's got a synergistic rhythm to it that you just don't see too often in Destiny, with its continuous invis, volatile, kill, and repeat loop. The one tiny issue with this exotic is that it does get outclassed by more defensive-based invisibility exotics like Graviton Forfeit, Sixth Coyote, and Omnioculus in high-end content where volatile rounds don't hit quite as hard, and going invis on kill becomes a little less on demand and reliable, landing it comfortably in the A tier. Simmering down a little bit, we have the Verity's Brow Solar Warlock build, a setup that tried to replicate the former strength of the pre-nerfed Starfire protocol. Don't get me wrong, it hits like a truck and has some pretty nasty grenade regen to boot, but it only feels extremely strong in team environments where everyone else is also using it. Rocking it solo just doesn't bring that same feeling that you get when you have 2 other friends also proccing death throws and feel the flames alongside you, and because of that, it sits squarely in the B tier. Accompanying it in this tier is a build that I honestly never thought would fall off of its former S tier rank, the Syntheseps Solar Bonk Hammer Titan build. I'm going to be 100% honest, this build is still pretty decent, even despite the multitude of restoration and Syntheseps nerfs that we have seen it eat over its years of dominance. The Bonk Hammer still does a solid amount of damage with Roaring Flames ×3, and the consistent healing and Scorching Sunspots are quite nice for ensuring survivability as well. But good lord, it just feels horrible to use these days. I understand Bungie wanted to nerf it, but picking up my Bonk Hammer and still having to wait a second and a half to chuck it again just feels like an eternity compared to the former days of throwing it as fast as you could pick it up. Feels so wrong, but then again, so does the new pickup cooldown. So B tier for the Solar Bonk Hammer, Syntheseps Titan. Moving on, we have what I consider to be one of the most underrated builds in all of Destiny, the Fallen Sunstar Arc Warlock. If there is one thing you take away from this video, let it be this. This build is one of the most satisfying and exciting setups that exists in the whole game. You literally have all 3 abilities up 100% of the time, spew electric jolting beams across the battlefield non-stop, fire off chaos reaches every 30 seconds, and are borderline invincible while you do the entire ensemble. This is one of those builds that I always felt should have gained way more traction than it did, so do yourself a favor and take it for a spin. And if that doesn't convince you to try it, maybe the fact that I'm ranking it in the S tier will. Next up is the current version, the 4.0 edition, of my Omnioculus Void Hunter setup, aka the one that I use 99% of the time to do Grandmaster Nightfall carries in my live stream that makes someone ask every 5 minutes, dude, your build is so good, do you have a video about it? For the most part, it's just the Omnioculus 3.0 setup with a few slight fragment and armor mod tweaks to perfect it a little bit more. But just like the Omnioculus 3.0 setup, this one also equips you with the tools to make it quite literally impossible to die in Destiny. If it wasn't obvious already, S tier for the 4.0 Omnioculus setup. Okay, this video is just getting a little bit long, so let's do like a quick fire round on the next couple of these. You ready? Radiant Dance Machine Stasis Hunter. Looks really cool, but Ice Shurikens just don't do that much damage, and Renewal Grasps got buffed after I uploaded this, so just use those anyway. C tier. Heart of Inmost Light Arc Titan. It's good, like really good. I don't know why everyone still thinks that Heart of Inmost Light sucks, but it's still by far one of the best Titan exotics in the entire game, and running it on Arc Titan just lets you obliterate everything with constant ability spam. A tier for Heart of Inmost Light. Vesper of Radius Arc Warlock was really fun in the Season of the Deep, but really relied a lot on the Arc seasonal artifact mods to comfortably stay alive. Still good, but definitely not what it used to be. B tier for Vesper. When it comes to Orpheus Rig Void Hunter, it's a simple question. Do you like shooting a lot of supers? Cool, then use this build so you get your tether so much that your LFG teammates might think that you are cheating. Don't worry though, Bungie can't ban you for being too good. A tier for Orpheus Rig. When it comes to Geomag Arc Warlocks, I really wanted it to be good, but if we're being 100% honest with ourselves, Fallen Sunstar is just way better when you look at the bigger picture. C tier for Geomags. Okay, we got like 8 builds left and 5 of them are in the S tier. So let's finish strong. Starting off with the updated 2.0 version of the Lucky Pants Solar Hunter build, this setup came in right after hand cannons just received a big package of PvE buffs. Needless to say, these additions, along with a few tweaks in the fragments, armor mods, and weapon recommendations department, this build configuration took a previously A tier build right up into the coveted S tier. In that same season, we also received a bunch of new strand aspects, one of which was the new Weavewalk Pseudo Invis Strand Warlock option. This is another one of those builds that I think didn't get the traction it deserved because this setup offered practical on-demand invincibility along with a consistently regenerating Threadling drone strike that could wipe any enemy off the face of the planet. You've also got exotic boots that make extra threadlings along with some exotic weapons that really took this thing over the top. All of that, and Needlestorm is just an incredibly good super. S tier for the Swarmers, Strand Warlock. The Renewal Grasps Stasis Hunter is one of my favorite comeback stories of all time. An extremely interesting PvE exotic that launched way too hot in PvP and found itself in the same graveyard that young Ahamkara's Spine sits in right now. For some reason I will never understand though, Bungie just randomly decided to undo all of those nerfs and restore it to its former glory. And for some reason, it hasn't regained any of the traction in PvP that found it nerfed in the first place. Maybe it wasn't that OP after all? I don't know. I don't play that dumb mode. All I know is that for Stasis Hunter in PvE, it is still by far the best option, landing this build comfortably in the A tier. Now, when Strand Hunter originally came out, I always wanted to find a build that made me feel like Spider-Man, and the Cyberarachne's Facade Strand Grapple Hunter build did just that. Simply put, double grapple grenades, plus Widow Silk grapple points, plus Woven Mail ungrapple activation, plus spinning strand Beyblades equals a lot of fun. Admittedly, it is a lot of work and effort to accomplish what other builds can do with 20% of the brain power, but it looks really cool, and it's pretty fun to use. So, B tier for the Cyberarachnes. Next up is the Oathkeeper Solar Hunter Bow loadout, my temporary solution to the young Ahamkara's Spine nerf that broke everyone's hearts that hit a few weeks before this build video dropped. It's a decent build, don't get me wrong, but it was never meant to be the meta Solar Hunter option for a while, just a branching off point while we waited for some other solar exotics to rise up and take the empty throne left by young Ahamkara's unfortunate exit. As a result, C tier for the Oathkeepers. Finishing strong with our final 3, we have our Banner of War Strand Titan that might be the strongest build of the year, maybe even the strongest build of all time. And don't worry, saying that will not get it nerfed. I promise Bungie does not care about my game balance opinions. Understanding the strength of this build is really quite simple. When you see a bunch of top tier speedrunners solo flawlessing brand new dungeons in 10 minutes and soloing raid bosses and less DPS phases than a fire team of 6 can, that should tell you that something pretty strong is going on. Not to mention you also have the option of running it with strongholds and a sword to just hold block and become literally impossible to kill. One of the easiest S tier placements of my life. Now we move on to this season, where things kicked off rightly so with the newly buffed Shards of Galanor Hunter build. I've always loved anything Blade Barrage related ever since the super was added to the game. It is by far one of the most visually pleasing abilities to both witness and to personally use. Shards was already pretty decent in the sense that you could get half of your super back for hitting basically anything, but it never made sense to have it equipped during the down period while you were building back up to your next super. Until now. In the current meta, this is an easy pick for one of the best Solar Hunter setups in the entire game and finds itself easily in the S tier. And I might even call it the best Solar Hunter setup if it wasn't for its precision shot flaming pistol brother, who also found his way back into the spotlight after 6 very, very long years, the Celestial Nighthawk. Anyone who has touched the Destiny franchise at any point predating Forsaken knows how powerful the Celestial Nighthawk could always be. And it seems so fitting that we get to end the year with a resurgence of the helmet that originally defined what it really meant to have a super ability. So with the Celestial Nighthawk also finding itself in the S tier, that's all she wrote for this year of Destiny 2 builds. And I want to thank each and every one of you for supporting my content over these past 365 days. I hope to see you in our celebratory live stream on the 30th and beyond over at twitch.tv/Mactics. Thank you so much for watching. Finish your 2023 safe and strong, and as always, have a great day.